Hello everyone. I wanted to make a response video of sorts to Vention MGTOW. He did a video a few months ago now about being compulsively different and how that's affected his choices, probably for the better in his life. And this was one of those videos where I watched it and it was a good video, but it didn't immediately spur my thinking on the issue. But as I've kind of thought about it over the last few weeks since I've seen the video, I rewatched it once and I realized that it kind of applies to me as well in a way that's slightly different. And similar to Vention, I've always felt, and these are my words, not his, this applies to what I've experienced in life so far. I've always felt kind of like an outcast, particularly as it pertains to fitting into any one particular group of people. I've always found myself kind of in between groups, and so not really fitting in with one group very well. And basically, I see this as kind of a more political than personal thing, I think. It's not that I've been rejected by people that often. It's just that I usually have some sort of point of major disagreement with any particular group that there is. And I want to discuss kind of where I am with that. In the past, I've usually tried to negotiate with not fitting in to one particular group by finding what I have in common with any particular group and using that to try to fit in with whoever, and basically getting along on that basis by focusing on what I do have in common, what I can agree on them with. But what I've discovered is that this usually doesn't work because most people will reject you once you start to voice any opinions or perspectives that aren't agreed upon by most of the group that they think that they represent. So for me, examples of this have included, leftist versus traditional conservative beliefs. I've always kind of generally been conservative, but especially as I've become more aware of certain things that are dysfunctional and not really fixable in any sort of readily apparent way, I realized that traditionalism doesn't really work. For example, marriage today is not something that I find to be useful or something that I want to participate in. But, I'm definitely not a leftist. I definitely don't agree with a lot of leftist views, but I don't fit in with the traditional conservatives either. And politically speaking, those are the two main groups. You can talk about the alt-right and stuff like that, but even they are basically traditional in a lot of different ways. They want America to kind of flex its military muscle. They have views that are basically traditional, or for them it's about values that are not necessarily small government. It's more about their own interests, whereas for me, I'm conservative, but I'm more of a small government conservative than a lot of people. But even that, there are exceptions to that, where I think if the government has to step in and do something, I just don't fit in with either group. I don't really fit in with traditional conservatives. I don't really fit in with leftists either. So there's kind of that political dichotomy that I end up saying things that people on both sides don't like. Science versus religion is another example of this. And I may make videos on this type of topic at some point, or maybe not, I don't know. But science is basically supposed to be about following the scientific method. And a lot of the scientists that I see, the high-profile scientists, they're just basically making arguments based on authority. They're not really using the scientific method to reach certain conclusions that you don't really ever prove definitively. It's just based on, okay, this is what it looks like, the result of using the scientific method tells us, versus religious people who tend to also be kind of dogmatic, or they believe in things not based on reason, but based on what they've been told. And I don't really fit very well into either group. I do think that spirituality, religion can be important, and I think the scientific method is a great tool, but I don't really agree with the idea that either thing is always correct or always used properly or is always wrong either. So I do identify as a Christian, but I also believe in the scientific method's usefulness. And it's really hard for both sides to tolerate each other when it comes to those things, because people are so dogmatic either way with it that, again, I don't really fit in with either group. Another thing about me is basically I grew up in the middle of nowhere with sort of the idea in mind that I would just go to college and, like a lot of millennials, I was just told, get your degree in something. It doesn't matter whether it's useful. And, I kind of have this rural background, but at the same time, I don't really fit in with a lot of the rural people either, because I'm not really blue collar. I never took that path in life. So I don't fit in with the sophisticated academics, the supposedly sophisticated academics. I don't fit in with a lot of the country people completely either. Again, I'm somewhere in between a lot of the time. I don't really fit in with one particular group. And even just with small groups or individual people, it seems like as soon as there's an idea that I have or some sort of disagreement that I have with whatever people we're discussing, with whatever group or individuals I'm looking at, I kind of am just sort of by myself. I know it's hard for me to explain this, but I basically just don't fit in that well with any one particular group. And because there's always something different that I think or that I do compared to any one group of people, it doesn't really allow for me to fully integrate into that group. So the kind of end result of all this, and the point of me making this video, is that the more I thought about what Vention said, and the more I thought about how I don't really completely integrate with any one group of people either. I can't stand the groupthink. I can't stand the whole, you have to 100% believe in this ideology or you're not really with us. I can't stand that type of thinking from people. And from just the overall kind of background that I have, for better or for worse, like I say, I'm somewhere in between so often different groups that I think it's time for me to accept completely that being different in my own way is pretty much the way that I need to do things. And to no longer put much energy into fitting in with one particular group, in the sense that I just don't need to care whether I fit in with any particular group or not. And that's something that, for whatever reason, I've never consciously been aware of. I've never thought about that option, even though I probably should have by now, that I don't really need to prove anything to traditionalists, to prove anything to leftists, to the scientific community, or people that consider themselves aligned with the scientific community or with the religious community. I don't really need to prove anything to my family in the sense of, fitting in with that kind of rural background, blue collar background. I don't need to fit into any one group at all, because that's just not who I am. I'm really in the process of taking what works for me and realizing what does and doesn't work. And I've done this better over the last few years, where if I'm not going to have any sort of success with something, or if something's not really part of what I need to be doing, I just drop it, regardless of whatever group of people or whatever individual people think about that. It's about what I can do with my own well-being. The overall conclusion to this is that I think this is a logical step in developing a MGTOW type of philosophy, in the sense of getting down to business and really understanding what it is that I want to be and what my goals really are and how I can go about proceeding with those goals. Realizing that I don't really need to fit in to any one group, and that this can be a positive thing, that I don't fit into any one group, because it allows me to focus on things as the individual person that I need to be at this point. A lot of what I see from people who they only have that group identity, or it's a huge part of what they are, even if they have some individual differences, a lot of them are just wasting their time and energy. They're not really thinking for themselves. They're not really making good decisions for their own lives. They're just following some sort of ideology or some sort of dogmatic doctrine that doesn't really even help them in a lot of cases. And, I look at myself and I don't want to really fit in completely with any singular way of thinking, of looking at the world, other than understanding what's true based on my analysis and based on my experience and based on what I do agree with. I'm not saying that I'm not going to agree with conservatives on a lot of things, or that I'm not going to agree that the scientific method's useful, but at the same time, there are other useful ways of looking at the world, and that these things can coexist. It's just that most people don't have the mental horsepower to see what it is that they actually believe in, what it is that actually works for them in life. And so I just kind of wanted to thank Vention for making that video, because again, it was kind of strange that for weeks after I watched that video initially, I didn't think too much of it. But then I started to think about how I don't really fit into one particular group, how I've kind of been an outcast in that sense, how people oftentimes are really stupid in their behavior when they only have that group identity, how they don't act as individuals, and how they kind of sacrifice the positive steps that they could take in their life, or the things that they could do to make their life fulfilling and make their life make sense, because they feel like they have to satisfy that group identity, that they have to dedicate part of their energy to those groups' expectations. And I've realized that I'm better off without it. And again, I think that that's part of the MGTOW process. It's part of the process of going your way as an individual person, understanding that you don't need to fit in with any one group, and that's probably a good thing if you don't, because you can actually make decisions that work for you in your life better that way.